All right. Hello, everyone. Hi. My name is Janaea Willoughby, and I'm the branch manager. So we wanted to say welcome to the Orange Branch Library. We love it here. We like to say this is our nice, beautiful, cozy branch. We have a very active Friends of the Library group here, and they've gifted us with so many great things that people love to come here and enjoy. So we have a beautiful fireplace that some of you saw when you came in. We have a patio out front that you're welcome to sit outside, and a pollinator garden in the rear of the building if you ever want to take a walk around. So I'm saying thank you for coming here to visit, but I'm hoping that you'll come back. We have another program on Wednesday with local authors. They'll be discussing their book, Sixth Level. It's about utilizing the power of psychology for sustainable leadership. These two authors are actually local. They are from Moreland Hills and Pepper Pike, and there's a few other authors from other parts of the country. But they'll be here Wednesday at 7 o'clock. So if you're able to come back, please do. And if you want to get more information about that event or about other things that are going on in the library, you can grab one of our program guides, and we have some out front for you. And again, thank you for being here tonight. And I'll pass it over to Lynn.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Lynn Knoll, and I'm the immediate past co-president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. Thank you so much for coming out this evening and spending your time with us. I know there's lots of other things you could be doing or things that you could be watching besides being here, but thank you. Thank you for choosing this program to attend. So welcome to the forum, Complete and Green Streets, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland and co-sponsored by Case Western Reserve University Siegel Lifelong Learning Program and the Cuyahoga County Public Library. Our sincere thanks to all of our co-sponsors, and particularly to the Orange Branch of the library. Now, a brief note about the League. For over 100 years, the League has worked to improve our government and engage all Americans in the decisions that impact their lives. We never endorse or oppose political parties or candidates. The League provides many voter services and educational projects such as voter registration drives, nonpartisan candidate forums, online electronic voter information, and candidate guides, and of great importance, educational forums to increase understanding of a variety of issues. This program, Complete and Green Streets, has a positive impact on the environment and matters a great deal to the League of Women Voters. For since the 1960s, we, the League, has been at the forefront of efforts to protect air, land, and water. For example, here's an excerpt from the League of Women Voters' national position on the environment. The preservation of the physical, chemical, biological integrity of the Earth's ecosystem is essential for the maximum protection of public health and environment. The interrelationship of air, water, and land resources should be recognized in designing environmental safeguards. This forum will provide a more in-depth understanding of the benefits of complete and green streets and suggest ways to work within your community to make streets safe for all. This forum was organized by Catherine Hexter, Program Director of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. And as you can see, Ms. Hexter did an excellent job organizing this wonderful, this incredibly qualified panel for this program, and she'll also be serving as the moderator. So let's take this opportunity to thank her. Kathy? Oh, and please, just as a reminder, be sure to silence your phone.
Okay, welcome. So, what is complete and green streets? It's sort of just a phrase, but I want to start with a story that hopefully will explain what this is about. So a few weeks ago, we were driving back from Cape Cod from a summer family vacation, and we stopped in Erie, Pennsylvania. If you know I-90 and Erie, there are 3 exits in Erie. This is the second exit. We were getting off the freeway, and it looks like a lot of freeway exits. Strip shopping centers, hotels, gas stations, lining both sides of the streets, literally as far as you can see. There were 6 lanes of traffic and 2 turning lanes. So, there are cars exiting and entering the freeway. So we're stopped at the light, waiting to turn. And I looked up and I saw 2 young boys, probably, I'd say, ages 10 and 12. And they were standing at the corner waiting for the light to turn. There was a crosswalk. And as soon as the walk sign came on, the older brother grabbed the younger brother's hand, and they ran across 8 lanes of traffic to the other side of the street. And when they got there, I saw them wave, presumably to their parents who were in a hotel parking lot on the other side of the street. So I'm watching this, and as a parent, all I could think of was, thank goodness. Thank goodness they made it. But as a planner, which I am, I thought, we have to do better than this. And, for too long, transportation planners and engineers were almost single-mindedly focused on cars and about moving them as efficiently as possible. And while we are still building roads like the one in Erie that I just described, things are starting to change. Complete and green streets is a new way of looking at transportation. Instead of thinking about mobility and speed, the focus is much more comprehensive. Accessibility, safety, and aesthetics. How can people of all ages, especially those who may not have access to a private car, get where they need to go? Whether it's work, school, the grocery store, the drugstore, how can they get there safely and efficiently? And while we still want to be able to get places quickly, we also want streets that enhance the quality of our communities. So today's panel discussion is all about how local communities across Northeast Ohio are rethinking their street design to improve conditions for pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, as well as for vehicular drivers. I'm really happy to introduce our panel of experts. As Lynn said, these people really are experts. To give us a more in-depth understanding of the benefits of complete and green streets and suggest ways that we can all work within our own communities to make streets safe and accessible for all. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to go over, this way, the agenda. So I'm going to introduce them all, and then they're going to come up one by one and do a quick presentation in this order. And then, sorry. And then we are going to open it up for questions. There are cards, well, there were cards outside when you walked in, and Lynn will have some more to pass out. So we just ask that you write down your question, and she'll give them to me, and I'll read them to the panelists, and we can have a little bit of a discussion. Okay, so our first speaker tonight is going to be Angie Schmitt. Angie is a Cleveland-based writer and urban planner. She is the author of Right of Way, Race, Class, and the Silent Epidemic of Pedestrian Deaths in America. And she takes the story I told you and there are numerous stories in her book of how about pedestrian safety. It's an excellent book. It was published in 2020 by Island Press and named one of the top urban planning books of 2020. She's a graduate of the Levin School at Cleveland State University, which is where I first met her. And she is the founder of 3MPH Planning and Consulting, which works with leading change makers around the country advancing safer policies and infrastructure. Her writing has appeared in Slate, Vox, The New York Times, CNN Business, and other publications. She's a mother of 2 and hasn't owned her own car in nearly a decade. Our second speaker tonight will be Judd Kline. Judd is the mayor of Orange Village, and after retiring from Hirschman Architects in 2013, he discovered that architects don't retire, they redesign. He is the founder and president of Civitas Services. He's an adjunct professor at Kent State's Architecture and Environmental Design School. And he successfully ran for office here in Orange, first as a councilman and now as mayor. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture degree from Miami University with additional studies at the Architecture Association and at Case. He's an active member of AIA and in 2009 was recognized with their Ohio Public Service Award. And he is an AIA Fellow, American Institute of Architects. Our third speaker tonight will be Jacob VanSickle. Jacob has served as the executive director of Bike Cleveland since February of 2012. As director, Jacob works closely with staff, volunteers, and members to affect policy and infrastructure that help make Cleveland's roadways safe and our neighborhoods more vibrant. He's an alumnus of Spring Arbor University, where he earned a degree in sociology and is now a passionate Cleveland transplant. Prior to becoming director of Bike Cleveland, he was the active living coordinator at Slavic Village Development, where he created and implemented programs that got residents connected and active in their community. And he was part of the leadership team that created Bike Cleveland. Jacob is a League of American Bicyclists certified cycling instructor. He was recognized in 2013 as a Cleveland Magazine Most Interesting Person, and in 2018 as a Cleveland Foundation Placemaker. And he's an alumnus of the Leadership Cleveland class of 2021. Okay, our next speaker will be Phil Kidd. Phil is the Complete and Green Streets and Trails Manager for the City of Cleveland. Before joining the city, Phil served as Special Projects Manager for Northwest Neighbors, another community development corporation in Cleveland, where he managed the Gordon Square Special Improvement District. He led street greening initiatives and was involved with the roadway design review for West 65th and Lake Avenue. He's also a member of the Detroit Shoreway and Cadell Better Streets Committee, a resident-led program of Bike Cleveland, which seeks to improve the safety, comfort, and accessibility of neighborhood streets through hyper-local projects. Prior to his time in Cleveland, Phil spent over 15 years in a variety of community development and planning roles in Youngstown, and that's where I first met him. Our final speaker will be Annie Pease. Annie is Cuyahoga County's Senior Advisor on Transportation and Mobility. I think she used to have Phil's job at the city.
Yeah.
Yes. So her responsibilities at the county include advising county leaders on transportation policy and coordinating departmental transportation and mobility initiatives. Prior to the county, she did the same type of work for the city. And prior to that, she was the director of transportation at University Circle Incorporated, a nonprofit neighborhood development corporation serving University Circle. She holds a professional planning certification through the American Institute of Certified Planners and is a certified bicycle instructor through the League of American Bicyclists. She comes to Cleveland after completing her master's degree in city and regional planning from Cornell University and 3 years of community development work with the U.S. Peace Corps in Central Asia. She and her husband live in Cleveland with their young daughter in the Ohio City neighborhood. Okay, so that's a lot of introductions, but now I'd like to turn it over to our speakers.
Awesome. We're so excited to be here, and I get to start off just giving a little overview of this problem. I've been traveling around and speaking about this problem here. I call it the pedestrian safety crisis for about 5 years now. I just got back from Honolulu about a week ago. So this is what I'm talking about when I say the pedestrian safety crisis. We've seen about a 90% increase if you go back to 2009. And one thing I want to point out about this is really unusual. We used to be able to kind of expect that our traffic safety outcomes would get better since about the 1970s, and we started requiring things like seat belts and airbags. We're supposed to be getting better at this kind of thing. So when this first started occurring, kind of at the end of the last decade or the beginning of the last decade, a lot of people thought it was just an anomaly. But we now know that it's a sustained trend that has a lot of causes we can point to. Just real briefly, I want to mention this problem got worse during our pandemic years. Does anyone notice, when you're out there on the roads, have you noticed behavior has gotten worse? Anyone, show of hands? Yeah, we did see this big safety reduction as a result. And one thing that's really concerning about this is that especially what's happening with vulnerable road users, so pedestrians primarily, but we're also seeing similar trends with cyclists. It's driving up traffic deaths overall, which are a leading killer in the United States, especially of young people. It has basically eroded all of our progress. And while other developed nations have continued to progress, our safety record is eroding. We're now about 31% higher than we were a decade ago. Again, that's kind of unusual. And we're talking about 10,000 additional lives a year. And one thing I want to point out just briefly about here, I guess we don't have a pointer, but notice how it's kind of leveled off there at the higher level after the pandemic. We saw a lot of leading killers kind of increase during the pandemic years, including like opioid overdose and homicides. But fortunately, we've seen most of those come down at this point, back more to normal levels. But we haven't seen the same thing here. And if we can't kind of reverse this trend, we're looking at about 100,000 additional deaths in the United States over the next decade. Okay, so a little bit about who is getting killed. This is a problem where we're sort of starting to understand, like a lot of our other public health problems, that affects people unevenly. Black people and Native people are at increased risk to be killed this way. But also older folks are another demographic that's particularly at risk. And a couple of things about this. As far back as about a decade ago, the CDC sort of predicted that pedestrian deaths might rise just because the population in the U.S. is aging. This is a fast-growing demographic. And we haven't done a very good job planning sort of with these folks' needs in mind. Okay, so we also have this trend, when I'm traveling around speaking about this, I always use this photo. It's a picture of my son when he was 4 years old in front of a lifted Ford F-250. We also have this trend in the United States where vehicles have gotten a lot bigger, and that's contributing to the problem. So things we did in the past that might have kept people more safe when people were driving, like the more typical car was kind of like a Honda Civic in the 1990s, that four men could move by lifting. That's not the case anymore. Cars are a lot bigger, and when they strike people, they tend to hit them higher on the body. So that's contributing to this increase in fatalities we've seen and some of these eroding safety outcomes. The good news about this, I know this seems like a little bit of an overwhelming problem, but in most cities in the United States, and I'm using Cleveland as an example here, we can pinpoint just a handful of streets where wildly disproportionate share of injuries and deaths are occurring. So that's a case here. The formatting got messed up. 34% of fatalities and serious injuries occur on 7% of Cleveland's roads. Is that correct, Jacob?
I believe. I think it's actually, in the updated numbers, it's 51% happen on 14 of Cleveland's most dangerous roads.
Okay, so yeah, we know where the most dangerous roads are, not just in Cleveland, but in the county and in most of our major cities now. And one of the good things, and the other panelists are going to talk a little bit more about this, this is an example from Columbus of a street safety project, and often they don't have to be super dramatic. This is a road that was overhauled for safety. It's a really dangerous road. I'm blanking on the name right now. It might be Livingston. But anyway, this is exactly the kind of road where we see a lot that tend to have high fatality rates. This is a road in a low-income neighborhood. And you can see that it was overhauled with a little bit of safety money. This wasn't a really expensive project either. They didn't really even change the nature of the street that much, but they added those little bump outs, and those were added specifically to sort of correspond with bus stops there. And they added those little median islands. And they still allow people to make left turns kind of in front of those. So after that was implemented in Columbus, they saw speeds, excessive speeding, just kind of stop, and immediate improvements in safety outcomes. So small changes to design can make a big difference. We see examples of this in Cleveland, and the following panelists are going to get into more details, but different sort of solutions make sense in different contexts. So the context out here in Orange is different than in Cleveland, but I always recommend when I travel around and speak about this is to talk to folks in the community if you're trying to understand what the problems are and what the solutions might be that make the most sense. So this is a tool we use. Jacob and I were just talking about one of these, a walk audit. I don't know if that's ever been done here, but it's basically just a walk, a public walk with citizens where you go around and talk about, okay, what are the issues? How am I experiencing this sort of at the pedestrian level? How is it different than when I'm driving? And what might the issues be, and what kind of improvements might we come up with? So that's an example of a bump out that was done kind of in an inexpensive way in the city of Cleveland, and they left it a little bit away from the curb just to help with drainage. Again, it was sort of an inexpensive solution, but if you've ever gotten a chance to use those at Larchmere, they really do help, I think, with encouraging folks to yield at those mid-block crosswalks. Here's another example, and again, more folks from this panel are going to have local examples. Here's something we tried out. A lot of cities are experimenting with this kind of thing, where temporary materials, inexpensive like paint and bollards, can be used to kind of change the infrastructure geometry there. Again, my son makes an appearance. But that was designed to slow down turning cars at an intersection that's considered a little bit dangerous. There's a really beloved, probably a lot of you are familiar with Mason's, that's right there. And it was very popular. And since that time, we got a chance to test it out, that kind of redesign with paint, again, inexpensively. And then we were able to see this is popular, the neighborhood likes it, and the city of Cleveland has since committed to come back and when the street is rebuilt, make that permanent and use concrete to sort of change the curb radii there. Okay, there's a lot of tools like this. This is a study that was done on BCRs, that's cost benefit. So they tested out different tools we can use to improve safety on our streets. So certain things like pedestrian leading interval right there are not very expensive. That's simply retiming traffic lights so that when the light turns, the pedestrian gets a walk signal before the cars get there, sort of okay to start turning. And just giving pedestrians a few seconds head start can make a big difference in safety. This was tested by an academic study in Texas, and they found the benefit cost return was 21 times. So there's a 21 time bigger safety benefit in economic terms than the cost. You can see some of the other tools and sort of the way they calculated that out here. But again, they don't always have to be super expensive, and they can be really, really important to people who might otherwise be injured or potentially killed. Okay, here's another low-cost example I like to talk about. There's some places in the United States, and this example is from Hoboken, which is a small city right outside New York City, where, again, it's a very different sort of type of place than Orange, but there's still lessons that can be learned here. They use this is called intersection daylighting, this technique they used here. And all it does is, again, very, very cheap with paint and bollards, but it prevents cars from parking too close to that crosswalk. So as you think about if there was a car in each of those spaces, you'd kind of have to walk to the edge of the crosswalk and stick your head out, right, just to be seen. So in Hoboken, they've had a tremendous amount of success using these kind of techniques. And again, they go back like the city of Cleveland promised after we did this experiment in Ohio City, and when they go back and they redesign the street, they make all that concrete, so they make it permanent. And they're a real inspiration to people all over the country because for 5 years in a row, Hoboken has had 0 traffic deaths. So there's a number of cities kind of around the country that are getting closer and closer to achieving that, and that's what we call Vision Zero, so 0 traffic deaths altogether. So they're a real inspiration, and again, it's all very context specific. They're a very dense place that's right next to New York City, but it doesn't have to be expensive. Again, that's a little bit about how intersection daylighting works. I'm going to pass it over to the mayor here next, and he's going to talk more about the local context.
You'll have to excuse me a bit. I am recovering from pneumonia, and it's going to take a while to get back together again. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit is the local context, and talk specifically about Orange Village and how we've looked at pedestrian access as an important component of our community, and how do we engage more of our community through providing pedestrian means to get from where they want to go to where they need to go. And so I thought I'd begin with talking, giving a little bit of background about Orange Village. Orange Village is a 4 square mile community bounded on the east by Moreland Hills, on the north by Pepper Pike and Woodmere, and to the west by Beechwood, Warrensville, and to the south by Solon. So we're kind of landlocked in this little cube in which we live. The population is about 3,500 people and 1,500 homes. So it's not a very big community. Over the years, it has been really largely a residential community with a variety of housing types that tend to be a little bit larger because we have larger properties in the communities. And we're seeing more smaller development, smaller residential development lately, which has given rise to a more thoughtful way of allowing people to communicate and to get from the places where they live to the places where they want to go. So the first major opportunity that we've had in our community is the development of Pinecrest, which many of you may have seen on your way over here coming down Harvard Road. Pinecrest began planning in 2012-13. It went to referendum in 2013 and was passed and was developed. And in 2014, we held a community-wide survey to find out from our residents what was important, what did people really want to see in their community. And the thing that came up out of it was they wanted to see sidewalks. They wanted to be able to walk safely. There are a lot more younger families in the community than there were before with small kids, and putting kids out on major streets or streets for that matter is not a particularly good idea, as we just heard. And so from that, we decided we needed to develop a strategy for how we might move forward in developing a infrastructure network of pathways. And we came up with this concept we called recreational trails, not just sidewalks. And when you see what we created, you'll see that they are more like trails than they are like sidewalks. We felt they needed to have a little bit of articulation to them, that they weren't going to be straight lines. One of my friends told me that we're teaching our kids to drive like their bikes like drunks, because the roads have, the sidewalks have lots of curves on them. But Pinecrest became a big business driver. At the same time, it became an economic opportunity for us to do something really different. And it was at that point that we started to design the project, and we went to the developers of the Pinecrest project and said, you know, once this thing is all done, it's going to be the roadway to your businesses. It's going to create opportunities for your businesses to see our residents walk to your stores. And that having been said, we came up with this plan to develop these recreational trails, and as you can see from the images on the upper and lower images, these trails are kind of curved. We felt it was really important to leave all the appurtenances where they were and try to avoid having to take things out, including people's gardens in their front yards and their front yards, and give them a little more flexibility. They're a little bit wider than a normal sidewalk. They're 5.5 feet wide, so they're a little bit bigger. And we wanted to avoid trees wherever possible, because trees are really important. You know, we come back and plant trees and wait for them to grow in 30 years. Well, why not protect the ones that are there and go around them? So we did that. And having come up with the design, we then had to figure out, well, how are we going to pay for this project? And we could do it a lot of different ways. We could go to the community and say, let's pass a levy, let's pass some other means to pay for it. But given my background and my experience with working with shopping center developers, I went to the developers of Pinecrest and said, your customers are going to be on these sidewalks, so why don't you contribute to paying for them? And they did. They contributed over $5 million to the village to pay for the project using something that in the shopping center industry is called a common area maintenance fee, that's charged to the retailers individually when they have to maintain the buildings and the property. This was baked into that, and so there was a fund that was created through that, and we then had the funds to go out and build this. And we've built a structure of sidewalks that extends all the way through Orange Village on all the main streets. And guess what happened? Oh, I didn't have a picture of it, unfortunately. People started walking to the shopping center instead of driving there. I would see people in my development coming back with bags from Whole Foods. And the only way they had those bags from Whole Foods is they walked from their homes to Whole Foods and back again. And from some of the other stores, we have REI, and I saw bags from REI that people were carrying with them as they walked down the streets. And not only that, they were walking as families. They were engaging with each other. In fact, one of my council people has this idea that next summer we're going to do what they call trail talks. And we're going to have a topic of a subject, and people will, sign up and they'll take a hike down the road and learn about that, whatever it may be. So not only are they used for recreation as the intended purpose and exercise, but they're used for community and communication. And they've been so successful that the adjacent communities are now picking up the ball and saying, hey, we want this too. And Woodmere, which is immediately to our north at our sort of western end of our community, was able to get funding through the state to extend the trails from where they stopped in Orange Village all the way up to Chagrin Boulevard, and to allow people to not only go to Pinecrest, but to now go to Eaton Collection on Chagrin Boulevard using the sidewalks. And Pepper Pike just recently, this past summer, passed a referendum to add trails like ours to their community. And if you drive down Lander Road up here, you'll see the construction underway. When I became mayor, which took place this January, I've only been in office for now 10 months, my predecessor asked me and said, you have to promise me that when Pepper Pike completes the trails to the Lander Circle, that you'll build the last mile and you'll connect our trails to their trails. And now we have a new school on Lander Road, and it's all the more important to have those trails because kids will be on those walking around. There's a lot to be said about traffic calming, and to that point, we're and reaching back to what was said already and will be said again. Traffic calming is really important, slowing down traffic, finding ways in which to do it. And our most dangerous intersection in the community is one you just came around, which is Lander Circle. I don't know how many of you navigated that, but it is crazy. It has too many entrances and exits on it. It has too many street cuts on it. And so I've reached out to Mayor in Pepper Pike, the county, and the ODOT to have a summit to discuss how might we redesign this traffic circle. As was mentioned, I'm an adjunct professor at Kent State, and I have my kids almost every year do a design project using the traffic circle over here to figure out what to do with it. And they've come up with some pretty clever ideas, and a few of them are really worth pursuing. Another idea that we are looking at, and we're maybe doing an experiment with it at Pinecrest, is I came across something that are called 3D crosswalks. And they're painted on the ground, and they look like they're three-dimensional. They look like they're floating in the air. And when drivers come to them, they're like, they have to stop because they can't figure them out. They don't know whether it's going to hit them or whether they're going to cross over it. I think at some point it'll go away because they'll figure out, this ain't real. I'm not going there. But it'll have its effect. And we recently applied for a grant, a state grant, and we're, I think, going to win it to install more speed radar devices in the community that help slow traffic down. We find that people, when they have those little flashing lights that tell you you're going too fast, they actually react to them. So there are all kinds of things that we're about. The real important thing is the connection that the sidewalks have allowed us to have and to enable us to have a community that's engaged with itself. People are on the streets, neighbors are talking to one another, enjoying each other much more than they were before because they can get out on the streets and walk around. And with that, I'll step down and hand the ball.
Sound guy said we had to be close to the mic, so I hope this is close enough. Everybody, my name is Jacob VanSickle. As I mentioned in my introduction, I'm Executive Director at Bike Cleveland. I'm going to talk with you today a little bit about a deeper dive into what complete streets are and about some of the benefits. Before I do that, I'll give you an introduction into Bike Cleveland. So we're the region's bicycle and pedestrian advocacy organization that's working to create a region that's sustainable, connected, healthy, and vibrant by promoting bicycling and advocating for equitable transportation for all. While our name is Bike Cleveland, our work also benefits pedestrians. We do a lot of work now within the pedestrian realm, and you'll see some of the pictures here as well. We are a membership-based organization. A little plug, you should also join the League of Women Voters, but you should also join Bike Cleveland. We have over 1,800 dues-paying members, and over the past 12 years, we've advocated for the installation of over 120 miles of new bicycle facilities. We advocated for policies at the state and local and regional levels, including things like the 3-foot passing law. So if any of you are out there driving and you're passing a bicycle on any of these roads, make sure you give them 3 feet of space. We've also advanced ideas like Vision Zero in the city of Cleveland and helped them develop a Vision Zero action plan to try to get to zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries by the year 2032. And we also do education and encouragement programs. So if you go on our website, check out our events. We have a lot of really great fun rides and events. We invite you all to join. So to start, really, what are complete streets? It's important to note that complete streets aren't just the end result you see, a roadway with, good traffic calming where cars are moving slowly, where people are can easily safely bike and walk, but it's really about a process. And I think Phil Kidd's going to talk a little bit more about the City of Cleveland process, but in the end, it's really about bringing decision makers together along with community members and advocates to really understand the context of the street. Before I worked at Bike Cleveland, the City of Cleveland's projects, road reconstruction projects, were done largely internally amongst engineers, and the public wasn't brought into a project until it was 30 or 60% designed. Which in many cases is too late to really do a lot of really good traffic calming and permanent things that Angie was talking about. So through a complete streets process, we've helped inform how streets should be designed by bringing more people into the conversation. And again, Phil's going to talk a little bit more about that process. But when we think about incomplete street, we think about the story Catherine told us. We think about a lot of the streets we see around us. Our streets are really designed for automobiles. And when you start to change your approach and start talking with residents and talking with users about what you want your street to look like, it can look a lot different. One good example up here, this is, many of you may know, unfortunately the Guardians just lost on the other side of this picture. Well, this is Ontario Street in the City of Cleveland ahead of the 2016 DNC. The county repaved a number of roads around downtown, of the RNC, repaved a number of roads around downtown Cleveland, and Ontario was one of them. And our traffic engineers had a wonderful idea of, this really connects to a trail. We really want to get people in our downtown core, so let's add some share roads to this roadway, and that's what those little bicycle markings with a chevron are. And I've ridden this roadway many times, cars going 35, 40 miles an hour. It definitely does not feel like a comfortable place to ride a bike. Unless you're on the progressive field side, it is not a comfortable place to walk. So while some communities may say, job done, we got our sharrows on Ontario, that is not a complete street. We now have a really cool concept that's funded, thanks to federal tax dollars, thanks to Chantal Brown, called the Memorial Bridges Loop, which will make this street much more calm, much more pedestrian and bike friendly by creating dedicated facilities for people biking and walking to get around the river valley, but also to get into downtown, connecting from the trails as well. Let me turn my slide here real quick. As Angie mentioned, complete streets looked different in different contexts. What you might do in Orange is very different than what you might do in Cleveland. But a lot of the things that you do can be done quick, cheap, and easy. Things like installing speed tables on residential streets where there's high speeds. Things like adding curb extensions with bollards and posts. Things like putting your road on a road diet where you're basically just taking a 4-lane road and making it 3 lanes, 2 travel lanes with a turning lane to create space for bicycle facilities. These are things that can be done quick, can be done cheap, can be easy. But to get there, you really have to change your mindset about what you're thinking about the street and not think about it in terms of how do we move traffic as fast as possible. But as you can see here, flip the pyramid. Stop thinking about, everybody's driving, let's make the road safe for them, but let's flip it. We don't want people to drive as much. We want people to be able to walk and bike and access public transit. So let's prioritize those vulnerable road users first in our decision-making processes. And when you do that, you get a lot of benefits. Here's 4 of them. I'm not trying to point out that complete streets is a silver bullet to solve all of our social problems, but it's a big piece of the puzzle. And I'll note a few stats. On the economic side, in between 2019 and 2023 in the city of Cleveland, there were 207 traffic fatalities, over 14,000 serious injuries. The economic cost of those crashes, including the loss of worker productivity, the cost of post-crash care, the cost of responding to the crash, over $644 million in lost revenue for the city, and the cost that it takes to address the consequences of that crash. So these are big things, and I note that, but we also have to think about the individuals of those crashes. You know, those are people, those are our neighbors, those are our friends. Angie just mentioned earlier to me on a road that we've been advocating for infrastructure improvements on for 10 plus years. Her neighbor was hit and killed. His van was actually sheared in half by a speeding motor vehicle on Lorraine Avenue, you know? Those are people that we know, and that's the breadth of what the decisions that are making and how we improve our streets can really impact. And lastly, people want it. Earlier this year, we conducted some public interest polling with the Baldwin-Wallace Community Research Institute, and 65% of Clevelanders said they would like to ride a bicycle more often, and 75% agreed that the city of Cleveland should spend more money to improve biking and walking and access to public transit. The stat that's not up here was also 72% of people wanted to bike more or walk more because they wanted to, but they don't because they worry about their safety and concerns about being hit by a car. So people want to do it. We know there's benefits. We know the process. We need to turn the pyramid upside down, prioritize vulnerable road users first, and we'll be in a good place. And hopefully our streets will look a lot like some of these ones here. My contact info. Thanks, everybody. I'll turn it over to Phil Kidd. Phil might mention this. I'll give him a little bit more of an info. But Phil is also running every street in the city of Cleveland. So he knows the streets better than probably anybody on this panel. He's a good dude.
Okay, so I think those who have spoken so far have done a really good job of giving some examples, and I have a slide here at the end that shows some more examples of what we'll call quick build opportunities, so smaller practical projects that don't require a lot of resources but have big impact. But before we do that, we're going to go high level for a second and just talk about, as Jacob mentioned, about the process in Cleveland, because Jacob did a good job teeing it up and explaining the problem we had in Cleveland, which was so much of the, Cleveland's 84 square miles, and there's about 360,000 people that live there. And it's a tale of different, situations, each side of the city, neighborhood by neighborhood, as far as road widths and density and all different types of factors. So there isn't one kind of approach that we take to when we're looking at a roadway project in Cleveland. But one of the things, regardless of where we were at in the city, was that, as Jacob did mention that, and I've been on the other side of this table when I worked at a nonprofit on the west side, Neighborhood Development Corporation, is a lot of times we would know that a roadway project was going to be scheduled for improvement. These projects are usually put into a pipeline about 3 years out. And during that period of time, we would get to a point where, probably about 2.5 years of that 3-year timeline would pass. And then the city would call a public meeting and they would kind of announce generally what the design was going to be for that street. And of course, a lot of people who were interested or maybe had some specific experiences, negative experiences on the street, knew this was going to be their opportunity for once, and maybe we don't come back to a street and make improvements for 20, sometimes 30 years. So this was a generational opportunity to make these improvements. And when the city's coming to a public meeting and they already have a design that's pretty much, the cake is baked almost, that presented a lot of problems for folks that were looking to really make some significant improvements, and a lot of that dovetails with the work of Bike Cleveland because you had now a lot more advocacy that was able to back up a lot of these recommendations, and that really does go a long way. Now that I'm kind of in the machine here of City Hall and helping make these decisions, it really does help. But in 2011, we passed the first Complete and Green Street ordinance, and it was pretty good. I would call it a good start. It gave us a framework for how we should approach this work, but it really wasn't solving the process situation, where we were still having this issue where these designs were largely predetermined. There was a little bit more room for wiggle room, but more importantly, we were already in a situation where the funding for these projects had already been determined. And so there wasn't a lot of flexibility. And so when the current administration came in, And Bike Cleveland now is, at this point, probably 10, 12 years in, membership of 1,800, a lot more interest in this work and a lot more of a network that can help support a lot of these design ideas. The city decided to, or the administration, the mayor along with the council person, decided to kind of take the Complete and Green Street ordinance to the next level. And by doing that, what it did was it created some more structure to the process. And what that looks like is now that when we are approaching these roadway projects, when we know that a project's coming up in 3 years from now, we have formed a committee within City Hall that has folks like Jeff Sleesman, who's a resident in the city of Cleveland. We have folks from ODOT. We have folks from the sewer district. It's a true ensemble of when we're talking about Complete and Green Street, those practitioners who are thinking about this in their own individual ways, thinking through these projects several years in advance. And what that's allowing us to do is to everybody kind of take a look at a roadway project through different lenses and be able to figure out what is an ideal scenario for this project that we want to see, not just through purely a traffic engineering lens, but through an ADA lens, through a street grading lens, a sustainability lens, through active transportation lens. And in that process, it's very public. So there's these meetings that happen quarterly. We have to document those processes. If there's any things that we cannot do, we let the community know why and what we can't do. But more importantly, it allows us to start to figure out our budget. So if we know that a street is going to be a high priority from this committee or in the public 3 years out, we're able to start figuring out our own finances and all those grants out there that we can start shifting those dollars to get better outcomes. And this is somewhat of a newer process. So next year we'll start to see the first of these roadway projects actually get installed through this. But I can tell you, as we're kind of zeroing in on some of the designs, we are incorporating a lot of those comments, and the outcomes are presumably going to be a lot better in some of these cases. Now, what I'm telling you is a city of Cleveland, large city in the United States, high-level picture of a process, right? That does not apply to most of the communities in Cuyahoga County or Northeast Ohio. There's a lot of other, different examples at different scales of that. In fact, Jacob and I just spoke to the Lakewood City Council, because Lakewood City Council, which is a city of 5 square miles and about 40,000 or so people, is looking to incorporate something similar to this. They have what's called an active transportation plan, which is kind of like a Complete and Green Street kind of light kind of version of that. And it's not going to be as robust as Cleveland's, but there's a lot of practical things that we're doing in Cleveland that they would like to apply. And so we had a conversation with their city council and with their engineers and with their planning department about what that could look like for them as they begin to refine this, because this isn't about a righteous movement to try to jam through an ordinance that creates standards that may be unrealistic. This is like what Jacob mentioned, which is it is a partnership and it is a way to try to think more collaboratively of how people in the community, whether you're someone from an institution or unit of government or just a resident, can have some input on some of these designs and get better outcomes for everybody and probably stay within the same budget parameters. So this is some of the outcomes. I won't go through all of this. Our Cadillac project was back in 2013, 2014. That's Fleet Avenue down in Slavic Village. That is what in some ways what kind of like a really, really robust Complete and Green Street project could look like. There's still design elements to that could be improved. Like, for example, the protection of the bike lanes on that street. The maintenance plans for a lot of these things are things that you have to take into consideration. And one thing is we're talking a lot about traffic calming and things of that nature. It is Complete and Green Street. So, street greening is a big portion and a big opportunity in places like the eastern suburbs out here, where if you're installing new sidewalks, how do we budget for maybe 150 street trees that could be included there, because people have never walked down that corridor now in that sense. And there's things like urban heat. If you're next to 4 lanes of traffic and you're somebody who might be walking to the destination that you're looking to go to, and it's 91 degrees in July, that's an issue. And in parts of Cleveland, that's a serious issue because you have people on fixed incomes who are elderly and they don't have a lot of mobility options, and they are dealing with very low green infrastructure where they're going, and our asthma rates and all those things are very high. So that's a very important part of the Complete and Green Street work, something I'm personally passionate and experienced with, doing a lot of street tree planning projects. But this is just, I won't read through all this, but this gives you a sense of when we kind of entered this next phase of Complete and Green Street, some of those outcomes which I've already mentioned. The really super bureaucratic Transportation Infrastructure Advisory Committee is just the name of the committee that I was just telling you about. But these are some of the things that we do. We have a mobility plan that we do now every 5 years. We're about to release it, and it holds us accountable. We say we're going to do these things every 5 years. The first 3 years of which coming up, we're going to do a lot of these projects that we were just talking about, these quick build projects where maybe it's just lane striping and refuge islands and things like that. But we're going to start knocking these projects out in a rapid fashion over the next 3 years. And, there's just, I think, better communication overall, more trust. And I take it upon myself to put together a newsletter, and if anybody's interested, get me your email afterwards. But I summarize everything that's happening on this front month to month in the city of Cleveland. So if you read this and you're like, hey, I live in, Warrensville Heights, and how are you guys doing that? That's part of the intent of that, too, is to share this information with other communities in Cleveland. I'm not going to go through this, but this is like what the actual sausage looks like when you go through the Complete and Green Street process. These are all the different departments, so it's not just me making decisions with a committee. We have to run this by all these other departments, and if someone, as the mayor, can probably sympathize with this, even in a village of 3,500 people, you still got to talk to your council and, other departments and public works and things like that. These things don't just happen. It's a process, and that frustrates the public. But it's important because you need to make sure that these are done right, because you're talking about public safety. And in some cases, you're talking about people's credentials. These are traffic engineers that have PEs and things like that that are important. My last slide is just some more practical examples of some real projects in Cleveland that we've done. I see Amy actually gets a shout out here. This is one of Bike Cleveland's, and I participate in mine. I mentioned it in the bio. This is a Better Streets Committee. So think of these as like neighborhood associations for people that are really interested in Complete and Green Street stuff, of like, how do we just do some block and tackle projects? This is them providing some input on their upcoming mobility plan. They did a great project. It's a good segue for this middle slide, which is what that group, a proto version of that group, really advocated greatly for at this intersection. So I'm going to step off the mic for a second, but we had significant traffic issues here with turning vehicles where these cars are at, just really quickly making these turns. And as pedestrians are crossing here, we had 3 pedestrian strikes just even this year alone. So what this group advocated for was doing what you see at those yellow center, that's called center line hardening. So you create a vertical delineation to really, as a visual cue for cars to slow them down. You neck down that corridor. You see with the white delineator. So we extended the curb line out there, and then we dropped 3 speed tables on this side here so that cars going east-west would slow down. And I think Amy can probably attest. I mean, it's made a pretty big difference, That didn't cost us a whole hell of a lot of money.
Didn't cost you anything, we paid for it.
That's right. Bike Cleveland paid for it. That's right. Bike Cleveland also paid for that. See the young lady there striping up. That's actually the pre-photo to the one I believe Angie showed, which is with her 4-year-old son. That's like that getting painted. So that's just a Saturday morning with 3 hours of 20 volunteers out there with paint that Bike Cleveland provided, and just to test these things out. Then the city's going to come in on the back end and actually, harden those spaces up in time as we get through it. And, this is an example of a speed table in Battery Park. Those familiar with Gordon Square, that just got put in this summer, dramatically has slowed traffic there. Those are protected bike lanes with plastic vertical delineators. We could do better than that, but that's what we have now with green thermoplastic paint. That is heading like from the Guardians Bridge, like into Ohio City. And that's been a really important improvement. And then, on the greening side, what you see over there, that's a tree planting project that we did. I wrote a $5,000 grant, and we planted these trees on Detroit Avenue on the west side. You start adding this stuff up, you do these projects, 2, 3 a year, 5, 7, 10 years later, you really have some serious improvements. And even, certainly in a community like Orange or any of the other smaller communities, I mean, it's that much bigger of a deal. And again, not really expensive projects, but practical things. So in Cleveland, we're doing the high-level stuff that I explained, the big stuff. But then we're doing a lot of this stuff too, and rely on community partners. We rely on the community. We open the door to the community being involved in that input. I go to all those Better Street Committee meetings myself. Don't have to do it, but I love doing it because I want to learn. I want to hear what they're doing. And that's what it takes. It's a village concept. So I will turn it over to Annie.
Real quickly. Is this on? I just want to say, that paint came from not Bike Cleveland, but NOACA loans it out, and anyone in the region can borrow it for that kind of a project for free.
Thank you. My name is Annie Pease. I'm Senior Advisor on Transportation for Cuyahoga County. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters for the invitation to participate on this panel. I'm excited to talk about how the county partners with municipalities and partners to help bring some of the projects that we're talking about to life. Before I get started, for anyone here, I do want to put a plug in for the Complete in Green Streets newsletter that Phil mentioned. It is very comprehensive. A number of these projects just take a really long time to get from A to B to C to actually get built. And that newsletter is bringing a lot of awareness, I think, that's been lacking in how the public sector communicates about these projects and just how involved they are and community touch points. And that newsletter is doing a really good job. It helps and supports all of our work to have that type of communication. So big plug for the newsletter. A little bit on Cuyahoga County. I think county government in general is a little bit of a confusing layer of local government for many people. But Cuyahoga County is shown in an outline here. Within the county, there are 57 municipalities, so 57 different cities, and then 2 townships. The difference between cities and townships are unincorporated, cities are incorporated. What that means relative to complete in green streets is that the county only has full maintenance responsibilities for county routes. These are roadways marked in blue in townships. Outside of the townships, so within the 57 municipalities, all of those levels of local government have maintenance responsibilities for their roads. County government can get involved in projects upon invitation of the municipalities, and we can spend our road and bridge money, which we use for roadway projects, on county routes, so those marked in blue. So again, it's a little bit of an interesting layer of local government, and given that anytime you're trying to understand projects or who's in charge or who's doing this or who's doing that, understanding who has the ownership or the full maintenance responsibility for any public space helps you track and understand what's going on. So this is how the county gets involved on roadway projects. In my role with transportation for the county, I'll say I have a new position that was created under the current county administration. I've been with the county since March of 2023. And my transportation really focuses on mobility and the ability for Cuyahogans and people visiting the county to get from A to B safely. And I'm also charged with thinking about people who are getting around outside of cars. 12% of Cuyahogans don't have access to a personal automobile. So a significant portion of our population is utilizing other modes of transportation. And just on kind of civic leadership level, a lot of what we hear is how exciting it is of how wonderful and how many things there are to do in Cuyahoga County. But boy, things feel separate and disparate. And to get from A to B, it can feel really disconnected. There's these pockets of activity. But things like the lakefront, the metro parks, healthcare institutions, schools, getting from A to B can be tricky. And especially if you don't have a car, navigating that is difficult. So a lot of what I focus on is understanding the visionary work that county planning commission, so the planning arm, county planning commission is its own commission, but they're housed in our same building with county government, which is a huge asset to the operations of the county. But part of what I understand are the recommendations from transportation plans that are looking at how people are getting around and the look and feel of public spaces countywide. And how we, as county government, can operationalize some of those recommendations and also work with municipalities within the county to carry forward and take action on recommendations from countywide transportation plans. A few that relate most critically to complete and green streets are a countywide transit-oriented development study. This is looking at high-frequency transit corridors throughout the county and identifies opportunities to increase both the density around those transit corridors and jobs and housing, as well as improve transit service themselves. The Cuyahoga Greenways Plan is a county-wide plan for greenways. So this is a county-wide system of trails. The first plan was done in 2019, and there's been a lot of progress on the implementation of that plan. So County Planning Commission is currently coming together to actually really account for what's been done and engage with communities to make sure the recommendations of the Greenway Plan stays updated. And then the urban tree canopy assessment looks at tree coverage across the county, and there's some really high quality aerial mapping of where tree canopy exists and where it doesn't exist. That, of course, is really important from a heat island effect and equity standpoint, but also impacts roadway projects. And when we're doing projects, sometimes if the curb is moving, that can impact street trees. And so just having a good grasp on people who are executing projects with what are out there and what the conditions are is important for completing Green Streets projects. So these are the types of plans that live in county planning, and especially I'll shout out the Cuyahoga Greenways plan. There's a partner group that was really like the steering committee for people who giving input on that plan. Since 2019, this partner group has continued to meet and talk about the recommendations. The Bike with a Mayor series that started last summer is a product of people really coming around on the benefits of these types of projects and keeping them front of mind, both for leaders and interested community members, to understand how sometimes projects can seem like, why are we doing this here? Or, why this? But understanding, I think, especially for communities wrestling with how to do a bike project or a pedestrian project, when they're connected to a county-wide system, it's very powerful to understand that this bike facility or this pedestrian enhancement is bringing people and increasing access to the regional park system or the lakefront or a job center. And so that's been a really great precedent and something that we're working on for some of the other plans as it goes from a plan phase and we're starting to move towards implementation. One other important plan, County Planning Commission just received a big grant to do a county-wide road safety plan. Similar, I think it was Angie's slide, she showed the network for Cleveland that showed the orange segments for the high injury corridors. County Planning Commission study will fill in that high injury network map for the rest of the county. Some of the municipalities have been very active in kind of developing that map for themselves. But this, similar to the transit plan, the Greenways plan, will be a safety-focused plan and really help the county and municipal leadership understand priorities and how they can best channel limited resources for high impact. I also want to mention that County Planning Commission does have a complete streets toolkit. Again, while the county supports and helps facilitate projects, the complete streets toolkit is really targeted towards communities, both practitioners, so people who work in local government, but also people who are interested in what this looks like. It has some data about what the conditions are across the county and has tools that local leaders and citizen groups can use to move complete streets forward in their communities. That's available at County Planning Commission's website. A couple of projects I want to mention. So these are county projects that we shepherded really on behalf of the community's desires. But having done these countywide plans and convening people around these topics of why connected bikeways and why safety and transit corridors are important really helped have a more robust conversation around the actual project. Wolf Road is in Bay Village, and it was both in a community-based plan and ended up being in the Cuyahoga Greenways plan to have a bike facility, east-west connecting Clegg Road over to the Cahoon Memorial Park. So you'll see the condition of the road on the left before the project and afterwards. This is an example of, had there not really been that engagement with the community and a strong voice from the municipality to have a different striping and a different look and feel of the street, it could have very much ended up like the image on the left with fresh pavement, but all other conditions would have remained the same. Another example is Green Road. This project occurred in South Euclid. It was in 2 phases, but it started just south of the Metro Park on the north side of South Euclid and comes all the way down to Cedar. Again, image on the left before, image on the right afterwards. The recommendation from the Cuyahoga Greenways Plan was actually for a bike facility on South Belvoir, which is just a block east of Green. And given the timing of the conversation of the plan in this upcoming project, the community expressed a very strong interest in having a road diet on South Green, so turning it from 2 lanes in either direction to 1 lane in either direction with a center turn lane most of the way, bike facilities, and then the intersection on the right is near a school. Liberty heads towards a school, so like special enhancements in areas where you know that there might be lots of walking or kids around. Another example, and I think these 2, Green and Wolf, are really good examples of kind of how complete streets can be applied differently. Sometimes you're talking about a really big overhaul and you know the tree canopy, or you need a wider sidewalk, or the facility like really needs an overhaul. And sometimes complete streets can be a simple connection like pedestrian enhancements because there's a safety issue, or on-road bike facilities. I think a big barrier to moving complete streets forward is the perception that every project is going to be very expensive and that we can't even touch this topic. It's scary because we don't have the money for that. And I really encourage the folks I work with to have a big conversation of what the municipality's goals are with each of their projects. And depending on when that conversation happens, always the earlier the better, but depending on when that conversation happens, you can incorporate some of this stuff at a fairly low cost. The last project I want to mention is Garfield Boulevard, and this one's timely as shovels just hit the ground on this project in August of this summer. The image on the left are the current conditions at the top, and the image on the right is a rendering for what's under construction now. Garfield runs east-west through the city of Garfield Heights, and the arrows in blue on the left are a connection to the towpath trail. So major trail facility, and those are bike facilities. The project extent to the right is the Garfield Reservation. So Garfield Boulevard just makes a very natural connection between 2 major park facilities. This is a recommendation of a TLCI plan that the city of Garfield Heights has and was reinforced in a master plan that the city did. And this project is the culmination of the city, the county, Cleveland Metro Parks. The sewer district is actually involved in this project too for stormwater management, really coming together with funding. And this is a more of an overhaul type of project than the other 2 that I mentioned. And it took a lot of people coming together, being solid on what the vision is for the project, and now we're able to move forward. So this is under construction now and should be open in the fall of 2025. Finish there.
We have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions, so maybe, why don't we just, yeah.
Raise your hand.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for our panelists?
This may be off topic a bit, but talking about physical improvements to the built environment, what about on the driver education side of things? Is there laws that say every 10 years you have to have a new on-road driving test because the environment's changed in 10 years? I mean, I remember when I started, you know, things have changed drastically in the community over time. So like I said, it might be off topic, but you have driver behavior that has to be addressed as well.
Yep, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the question was, great on all the infrastructure, which I'll note, this wasn't said, but I'll note, you know, is good for adjusting driver behavior as well. You kind of designing a road to make drivers act the way you want them to, but what's being done to educate drivers on how to drive properly and safely, correct? Yeah. We, at Bike Cleveland, we have a public awareness campaign we put out each spring, and it's focused around driver behavior around people biking. It's called We're All Drivers, and it's really around the idea of kind of humanizing people on bikes. So we have like Sandy Alomar as part of it, a local dean who retired, some students, and there's images and messaging, and it points to a website on our page that basically tells motorists like, hey, here's how you drive around bikes, and it also has info on there about bikes, how to ride safely as well. We did work right before the pandemic with Ohio Department of Transportation and Ohio Department of Public Safety to modify some driver's education questions to ensure that new laws like the 3-foot passing law were incorporated into the driver's ed questionnaires. Yeah, that's basically all we do now. We're also big fans, as I mentioned when I introed your question, on designing streets so people drive the way that we want them to drive. You know, don't build a 6-lane road when you want people to go 25 miles an hour. You know, build a 1-lane road each direction and maybe add some bump outs and things to slow cars down. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't fully answer your question.
This question is, I'm not sure if it's on. Okay. It's for Phil and anybody else who's worked in and around city governments. But how do you help ensure ongoing momentum and implementation of policies and plans with administration changes?
Well, I will say that I think that what Cleveland did by creating or updating the ordinance that they have is important. And that's something that Jacob and I stress to Lakewood, because in government, particularly bigger governments, oftentimes what will happen is they'll introduce a policy and they'll say, well, we don't need to go through full legislation to mandate something. We know we'll just incorporate this basically as an administrative policy within. And I think based on probably everybody's experience here, you know, that doesn't, there's going to be instances where there's too much discretion and an important decision needs to be made, and there really isn't something holding those decision makers to a certain standard or outcome that's expected that the way of an ordinance would do. So I have found that being able to reference an ordinance to say that this is the reason why we need to see this design element on this project, this is the reason why we need to spend a little bit extra money on that design element, or the street greening, which often gets overlooked on projects like that, but is increasingly important. That's helpful. So that's the thing in my mind that stands out, and that helps me do my job because I have something behind me, basically a city law that I can say this is what we need to do. If anybody else wants to.
Let me jump in on that as well. It's really important to have and maintain institutional knowledge, to have people from previous administration that continue through to new administrations who understand the concerns and have done some of the pilot work, because very often projects undertaken in one administration doesn't necessarily get through to the next administration. As I said in my little brief talk, that I promised my predecessor that I would finish the last mile on my watch, should that opportunity arise. And now that it's has arisen, now I have to figure out how to get that done. But but within that, it's the people that I have around me that can talk to how we got it done before and how we'll get it done in the future.
I would just add, I think Phil mentioned this, but just specifically within Cleveland's complete in Green Streets ordinance, the requirement is that the city has to update the citywide bike plan every, is it 3 or 5? 5 years? And that just like kind of tucking in some rules like that into something that's just difficult to change, it does create that institutional pattern so that your people who are working there understand it was done before, this is an update, and it becomes routine. And I think the way that was crafted, it was done between both city council and city administration, so both perspectives were on it, and that type of clause was like subtly very important, but there was strong agreement between both arms of government that that's a priority and should be in there.
I'll add just one more thing, and I think, certainly a lot of this does fall on, city leaders. But I think one of the good things we're here today talking to you guys about this. So, as you're talking with your city leaders or your city leaders change, our hope is that you'll say, hey, did you know in Cleveland, $644 million is wasted on traffic violence? Let's not do that in our community, and let's build our streets safe.
Yeah, the Bike Cleveland survey that you did where 60 to 70% wanted safer riding and would do it if they did it. I mean, human nature being what it is, what people want and what people are willing to give up for that. I wonder if you did the same survey or if this was part of the survey, if you asked them all as drivers, would they want to slow down all their driving to make biking safer? I think you might skew the answer a little against bikers.
I think that could be about it. We did ask a question in there about would you be willing to, I'm not going to get the word exactly, but would you be up for removing on-street parking in favor of adding bicycle facilities? And that one was over 55% as well. Hold on, I'm drawing a blank. I think to your point, there is this perspective out there that, if I take a road from 4 lanes and I do a road diet, which would be making it 1 lane in each direction and adding a turn lane, that's going to snarl up traffic. And in my time at Bike Cleveland, the city's probably done, I only live in Cleveland since 2007, but probably reduced the number of lanes on city roads more than they ever have in their existence through road diets. And it hasn't played out. I think what we found and what other cities have shown is that doing things like road diets, making less travel lanes, can actually help optimize the street traffic flow so that you don't actually get held up because you're adding the capacity of that left turn lane. So imagine, you're in a 4-lane road and so you're behind somebody turning left, you have to stop or you have to weave out of traffic, which is an unsafe move. So you're actually improving the capacity of the street and the flow of the traffic as well. The last thing I'll note, and this is probably only for Cleveland, but we have roadways built for well over 1 million people, and we're under 400,000 now. I remember in my early days of Bike Cleveland, we had a board member worked at Squire Patton Boggs, 49th floor of Key Tower. I'm looking out the window at Superior, at St. Clair, at Chester, and I'm like, it's rush hour. Where is all the traffic? Like, we just don't have it. We can take many lanes of travel out, and people won't blink an eye. So.
Thank you all for a great presentation, and also Kathy for organizing. I'm just kind of curious, do you have the ability to bake in maintenance to some of the grants that are awarded to you? And if you can't, because I know you often cannot, how do you fund the ongoing maintenance for the trees or the green infrastructure or the little pylon things?
Okay, I'll kick this one off because this is an issue near and dear to me. Before I started with the city, I managed, those who are familiar with Gordon Square on the west side of the city, that section of Detroit Avenue from 58th Street all the way to 73rd, 10-block area or so, received about a $3.5 to $4 million streetscape makeover, which in part helped kick off, the renaissance of that district. That district's fortunate to have what's called a special improvement district, which means the property owners, they're paying extra fee for all those, maintenance of those enhanced services. That is very much not the case in most other areas where we do projects like this. Fleet Avenue, that photo I had up there was an example. Oftentimes residents are going out there, and I've helped them on Thursday nights, during warm weather months, and out there weeding those beds and things like that. I think that as we've begun to design some of these projects, we're getting smarter and more practical about the actual design, like elements to them. I'll give you an example of this. On Carnegie Avenue and also on Payne Avenue, 2 projects we have coming up this year, we knew that, those are 2 streets that are very wide, but also from the green side of things, they have very little green on those corridors. Those sidewalks are 15 feet wide. They were built for another era in Cleveland where that made sense in the 50s when it was largely in manufacturing, but now we have other goals. We need higher canopy cover, we need more stormwater mitigation, so we need more green. How are we going to maintain that? So what we've done is we are going to remove about 21,000 square feet on almost both those projects of sidewalk and put in grass tree lawn and plant the trees. But for the grass treatment, we're going to use low and low-grow grass treatments on that so that it's only one cut per season. And that's helpful also to explain that to a property owner who may have never had to maintain a tree lawn before. You know, there might be a light industrial business. But on the tree planting side, we know now, because we have good partners like Western Reserve Land Conservancy and others who are helping with us get better about this work, and also providing funding to provide the proper maintenance establishment of those trees for at least 3 years on that side of it. We used to just drop trees on street projects and walk away from them, and you get things like the Opportunity Corridor, you know, where we have 700 trees and half of them are dead, right? That's because, you know, that was a project where we did not have the right people involved in, you know, as far as on the maintenance side, at the table helping make decisions. These are all, unfortunately, lessons learned, but the point being is that there are errors that are corrected moving forward. Are we going to go back and do elaborate treatments like Fleet Avenue? Maybe not to that extent without a proper maintenance plan and budget. That's well, that's a cue if there ever was one. But I'll just say in general, that's definitely something that's top of mind, and I want to be able at the City of Cleveland and help other communities figure out how we can create self-funding mechanisms to be able to provide the maintenance side. Because quite honestly, it's also a huge opportunity on the workforce development side. You know, there is so much opportunity to be able to have people go out there and work on a lot of the screen infrastructure requires high maintenance. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's the city's property, and we should play a larger role. We can't just drop something like that in a nice design, then walk away and expect the community to take care of it, because it just ends up being a liability to that neighborhood in time.
Let me add just one, as a segue from what Phil was just talking about. Two things in Orange Village. We started a infrastructure levy, I want to say about 15 years ago, and it's permanent. It's now in our charter, and it provides an annual resource to maintain both our streets and roads and other infrastructure, but also the mechanism by which we can maintain some of the things that we install as a community. And secondarily to that, as I'm sitting here at this table, I know my city planner is working on finalizing what we're calling our tree preservation ordinance, that is including within it a new, what we're calling is a tree fund that will enable us to plant trees in other areas of the village and have a resource to maintain those trees and other green infrastructure that we may install. So those things are going on right now here in this community, and I think they're models for others.
Just one more local example to highlight on maintenance, so different from a roadway project, but we have a really excellent example in infrastructure partnership with the towpath trail. We would need a whole other panel to talk about the history of that project and how long it took and all that went into it, but through the project development process, there was an agreement made early on between the City of Cleveland, the Cleveland Metro Parks, Cuyahoga County, and then a nonprofit organization that throughout, as the project moved forward, the nonprofit organization being kind of the most nimble and flexible, they were going to be the community voice and the marketer, and if there's an event, they're going to be the programmer. The Metro Parks, once the trail was built, was going to maintain it, trim the trees, clear the snow, provide security. The City of Cleveland would maintain the capital for the trail when it needs to be repaired, the long-term capital maintenance of the trail. And Cuyahoga County built the trail, led the construction. So that was a 4-party agreement on a many, many $million huge trail investment. But early on, that need for partnership and the long-term maintenance, it was recognized that on projects like that, that needs to be accounted for early on. And so we have a gold standard and a sample project development agreement with the towpath that kind of lays out for many of our agencies what that partnership can look like. And for the towpath, so that's used locally as we're thinking about building out the network and adding more off-road facilities, what that can look like.
Okay. Is it a quick question, or I feel like we have to wrap up.
Or I can just get with the mayor afterwards.
Okay. All right. Well, I do want to wrap this up because the library is closing, and I very much want to thank all our panelists. I think, I don't know about all of you, but when I drive around or walk around, I can see the results of the work that you're doing, and I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I also want to just say that I think it's so encouraging that all of you work together because, you know, we have someone from the county, we have someone from our central city, and we have someone from a very small village, and yet everybody's working toward the same goal. And I think the more we can do that, I mean, I don't know how many of you are Orange residents or wherever, but the more we can get our own communities to get involved in this and to connect with each other, because, you know, 57 municipalities in Cuyahoga County, and each one is in charge of their own little 5 square miles or whatever it is. We have to work together. So anyway, I want to thank all of you for coming, and I sincerely want to thank our panelists. And I just have to give a League of Women Voters plug. This is the issue that we are advocating on. Please vote yes on issue 1. And if you would like
A sign, we have a few signs. The priority is streets that don't have a lot of signs yet and/or high visibility. So there are 2 signs here if you want one, you may speak with them.
Yeah, and if you don't understand it or you want more information, there's tons of information outside on the table. And with that, I'll conclude our program. Thank you.